Look, I'm the kind of guy who likes a quiet life, a guy who keeps his lawn mowed and his business to himself. But let me tell you something, the second you point a loaded weapon at my little boy, the quiet life ends, and the man you thought you were pushing around becomes the worst mistake you ever made. My name is Elias Thorne, and for 15 years I've served as a senior detective in the major crimes unit for this county. But in my neighborhood, in that cookie-cutter suburb of Oak Creek, I was just a guy in the faded jeans who tinkered with an old Mustang in his garage. I never wore the badge home. I never talked shop over the backyard fence, because when you spend your days staring at the darkest parts of humanity, you want your home to be a sanctuary, a place where the world's ugliness can't find you. But the problem with sanctuaries is that sometimes the wolves aren't outside the gate. They're the ones holding the keys to the neighborhood association. And in our case, the alpha wolf was a woman named Beatrice Vane. Beatrice was the president of the HOA, a woman who treated our bylaws like the Ten Commandments and herself like the deity who wrote them. And our feud didn't in oppose. Start with a gun. It started with a tree, a simple stubborn oak in my front yard that Beatrice decided was 3 inches too close to the sidewalk. She'd come by with her clipboard, clicking her pen with this rhythmic, irritating snap, telling me I needed to, and quote, remedy the obstruction, and quote. And I'd just smile, lean on my rake, and quote the actual county easement laws back to her until her face turned a shade of purple I didn't into oppose. No human skin could achieve. She hated that I wasn't into oppose. Scared of her. She hated that I didn't into oppose. Flinch when she threatened me with fines, and mostly, she hated that I knew the law better than she did. So she decided to escalate. She didn't into oppose. Just wanted to follow the rules. She wanted me to feel her power. So she convinced the board to hire a, and quote, private community safety liaison, and quote, which is just a fancy, overpriced term for a high school bully with a god complex and a cheap polyester vest. His name was Silas Vance, a guy who had failed the police academy entrance exam 3 times and was now walking our streets with a heavy-duty flashlight and a chip on his shoulder the size of a mountain. Silas spent his days stalking the cul-de-sacs, looking for kids on skateboards or trash cans left out 10 minutes too long. But Beatrice had given him a specific target, and that target was my 10-year-old son, Toby. Toby is the kind of kid who'd apologize to a ladybug if he stepped on it, a gentle soul who just wanted to fly his drone in the park. But Silas saw him as the perfect proxy for his grudge against me. The day everything shattered started out like any other Tuesday. I was finishing up a double shift at the station, processing a mountain of paperwork from drug bust, while Toby was out on his bike, headed to the community center to meet a friend. I was driving home in my unmarked unit, a blacked-out SUV that looks like any other suburban car unless you notice the subtle light bars in the grille. And I had my partner, Miller, in the passenger seat. We were tired, joking about where to grab the greasiest burgers in town, when we turned the corner onto Willow Way, and my heart didn't in oppose. Just skip a beat. It stopped entirely. There, in the middle of the sidewalk, was Silas Vance, his legs braced in a tactical stance, his arm locked straight, and a Glock 19 pointed directly at my son's chest. Toby was off his bike, his hands high in the air, his little body shaking so violently I could see it from 50 yards away, and I could see his mouth moving, pleading, crying, though I couldn't in oppose. Hear the words through the windshield. I didn't in oppose. Think I didn't in oppose. Breathe. I just slammed that SUV in a park and threw the door open while it was still rocking, and as I hit the pavement, the world went into that weird, hyper-focused slow motion you only get in combat. I heard Miller screaming into his radio for backup, his voice urgent and sharp, but I was already moving, my hand going to the holster at my hip. Not because I wanted to shoot, but because every instinct I had was screaming that I had to be the shield between that madman and my boy. Silas didn't in oppose. To even look at me, he was so caught up in his own twisted fantasy of authority, shouting at Toby to, quote, get on the ground and stop resisting, and quote, even though the kid was frozen like a statue. I roared at him, a sound that didn't in oppose, to even feel like it came from my throat, and quote, drop it, police. Silas, drop the weapon right now, end quote. He spun around, and for a terrifying, sickening half-second, that muzzle drifted toward me, and I saw the sweat on his forehead, the frantic, wild look in his eyes of a man who realized he'd stepped into a league he didn't into oppose. Belong in. He saw my badge, He saw the uniform Miller was wearing as he moved to flank him, and you could see the gears grinding in his head as his fake reality collided with the actual law. End quote. He was trespassing. He was a threat. End quote. Silas stammered, his voice cracking, but he still hadn't and oppos. T dropped the gun, and that's when I stepped into his line of sight, blocking Toby entirely, feeling my son's small hands grab the back of my tactical vest, sobbing into my spine. End quote. You point that gun at anyone else, end quote. I told him, my voice low and cold as a winter grave, end quote. And you want an oppos. T, walk away from this, Silas. Put it down. Now, end quote. He finally let it fall, the metal clattering against the concrete, and Miller was on him in a flash, driving him into the dirt with a knee in his back and the satisfying click of real, heavy-duty steel handcuffs. I didn't in oppos. T care about the arrest. I just turned around and scooped Toby up, holding him so tight I thought I might break him, feeling his tears soak into my shoulder as the sirens began to wail in the distance, a dozen units screaming toward us. And then, like a vulture sensing a kill, Beatrice Vane appeared. She came power-walking down the sidewalk, her face twisted in indignation, shouting about how we were interfering with, end quote, official HOA business, end quote, and how she'd have our badges for harassing her security officer. She actually had the nerve to walk up to me while I was holding my traumatized son and tell me that Toby was, end quote, violating the safety perimeter of the clubhouse, end quote, and that Silas was well within his rights to use, end quote, necessary force, end quote. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized she wasn't oppos. T, just a nuisance. She was a sociopath who had armed a coward and set him loose on children just to satisfy a grudge over a tree. I didn't in oppos. T, say a word to her. I just signaled to one of the arriving sergeants and said, end quote, handcuff her. Conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and impersonating a peace officer by proxy, end quote. The look on her face when the cuffs snapped on her wrist was better than any vacation I've ever taken. She went from a neighborhood queen to a common criminal in 3 seconds flat. The fallout was a nuclear winter for that HOA. We found emails, months' worth of them, where Beatrice had told Silas to, end quote, do whatever it takes to make the Thorns leave, end quote, even suggesting he, end quote, find a reason to detain the boy, end quote, to scare us. Silas ended up taking a plea deal for 12 years in a state facility, and let me tell you, a guy who pretended to be a cop doesn't in oppos. T, have a very fun time in a place full of people who were put there by real ones. Beatrice fought it. She spent every dime of her savings on high-priced lawyers, but the jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty on all counts. She's currently serving 8 years, and her precious house was sold at auction to pay the massive civil settlement Toby won. But the house and the money Don and oppos. T fixed the fact that my son still jumps when a car backfires, or that he won in oppos. T go near a man in a vest anymore. It changed us. It reminded me that the badge I wear is a burden of service, not a tool for ego, and it makes me wonder how many other, end quote, neighborhood authorities, end quote, are out there right now, convinced that a clip-on tie and a set of bylaws gives them the right to play God. I did what I had to do to save my son, but the scars stay, and I guess I'm telling you this because I want to know, have you ever dealt with someone who thought a little bit of power meant they owned her life? How far would you go to protect your family from a bully with a badge, even if that badge was fake? Drop a comment. Let's talk about it, because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't into oppos. T, the ones in the shadows, they into oppos. Re, the ones living right next door.